On a busy afternoon street, a little girl held tightly to the harness of her German shepherd, her only guide in a world she could not see. But when sirens split the air and officers stormed in, panic took control. One tragic mistake left her loyal service dog bleeding on the pavement, and the crowd frozen in horror. What followed was not just a fight for survival, but a battle for justice that would shake the entire community. Subscribe now to Shepherd Legacy for more powerful stories of courage and loyalty. And before we begin, tell us in the comments, which city are you watching from today? The city moved with its usual rhythm, that afternoon car horns echoing, shop doors opening and closing, conversations spilling across sidewalks. Among the crowd, a little girl named Emily walked carefully, her hand resting on the sturdy harness of her German shepherd, Shadow. She was only 9, born without sight, but the world was not silent to her. The shuffle of feet, the hum of engines, the warmth of sunlight across her face, these were the things that guided her. But more than anything, she trusted Shadow. Shadow was more than her eyes. He slowed her at curbs, stopped her at crossing lights, and pressed against her side whenever the crowd pressed too close. His steady pace gave her the confidence to walk where she pleased, without fear of stumbling into danger. People often smiled as they passed, touched by the bond between the small girl and the powerful shepherd who never left her side. Emily's mother walked a few steps behind, keeping watch, though she had long since learned to trust Shadow's instincts more than her own. That day seemed no different from countless others until the sound of sirens shattered the calm. It began with shouting. Voices barked commands, heavy boots pounded against pavement, and the sharp crackle of radios filled the air. Shadow tensed immediately, his body stiff, ears pinned forward. Emily froze, her hand tightening on the harness. She couldn't see the chaos unfolding, but she felt it ripple through the ground beneath her feet. People scattered around them, some ducking into shops, others pressing against walls. A pair of officers charged into the street, their weapons drawn, eyes scanning for a suspect they believed was nearby. In their panic, they saw only movement, the outline of a large dog pulling at a child's side. "Get that dog under control," one officer shouted. Before Emily could even process the words, heavy hands were upon her. She cried out, clutching Shadow's harness as officers shoved her aside. Shadow barked furiously, standing his ground between Emily and the strangers, but in their haste, they mistook his protective stance for aggression. A baton swung down. A sickening thud split the air. Shadow yelped, stumbling as Emily screamed his name. The crowd gasped, voices rising in protest, but the officers pushed forward, shouting over the commotion. Emily dropped to her knees, her hands frantically searching for her dog, her fingers finally finding his fur as he whimpered in pain. She couldn't see the blood streaking his coat, but the heat of it spread quickly against her palms. "Stop, please!" she cried, her small voice cutting through the street. The world had gone silent for Emily, silent except for Shadow's pained breathing and the pounding of her own terrified heart. The moment Shadow fell, the air seemed to split. The crowd erupted with outrage, voices shouting over one another. Some pulled out phones, recording every second. Others pushed forward, demanding the officers stop. Emily clung to Shadow's neck, her small hands trembling as she whispered his name again and again, her voice breaking with every breath. Her mother forced her way through the chaos, tears streaming down her face as she knelt beside them. "He's her service dog," she shouted, her voice filled with fury and fear. "He's her eyes. Can't you see what you've done?" But the officers, faces tight with adrenaline, hesitated only for a heartbeat. One of them looked at the girl, blind, trembling, clutching her wounded shepherd, and something in his expression faltered. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, their anger becoming a wall of judgment the officers could no longer ignore. Shadow tried to stand, his body shaking as he pushed against Emily's grip. Blood stained his thick fur, dripping onto the pavement, yet his eyes never left her face. He whined softly, nudging her hand as if to reassure her, even in his pain. Emily's tears soaked into his coat. "Don't leave me, Shadow," she whispered, her voice raw. "Please don't leave me." The crowd's fury only grew. A man stepped forward, pointing directly at the officers. "That dog was protecting her. You attacked a blind child's service animal." His words rippled like fire, igniting more shouts. Phones captured every angle, voices demanding justice. The officer's authority began to crack under the weight of dozens of eyes. One of them lowered his baton slowly, realization creeping in as the truth became impossible to deny. Still, the damage had been done, and Shadow's labored breathing was a cruel reminder. Emily's mother held her daughter close, one arm wrapped around Emily, the other pressing firmly against Shadow's wound. "We need an ambulance," she screamed. For the first time, the officers froze, their hands hovering uselessly at their sides as the crowd surged into action. Strangers rushed forward. A woman pulled off her scarf, pressing it gently against Shadow's side to slow the bleeding. Another man called emergency services, his voice shaking with urgency. People knelt in the street, shielding Emily and Shadow from the chaos as best they could. Within minutes that felt like hours, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air again, this time bringing medics instead of police. A stretcher was rolled forward, the medics kneeling beside Shadow with practiced urgency. Emily refused to let go until they promised her she could ride with him, her hand never leaving his fur dot as they lifted Shadow onto the stretcher. His eyes found Emily once more, ears flicking weakly at the sound of her voice. Despite his pain, his tail gave a faint wag. The crowd parted in silence now, watching as the little girl, her face streaked with tears, walked beside her wounded protector. The anger in their eyes didn't fade. It only shifted into something heavier resolve. This wasn't over. The truth would not stay hidden. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and urgency, the beeping of machines echoing faintly in the distance. Emily sat curled in a chair, her hands clenched in her lap, listening to the steady hum of Shadow's breathing from the room beside her. He had survived the night, but the image of him collapsing in the street still haunted her. Her mother's hand rested on her shoulder, but nothing could calm the storm of fear twisting in Emily's chest. Doctors moved in and out, voices low and serious, yet every update carried hope. The baton strike had caused deep bruising and a wound that required stitches, but Shadow's strength was undeniable. The German shepherd had fought through worse before, though Emily couldn't see his wounds. She felt his resilience in the way his tail thumped weakly against the bed whenever she spoke. When she was finally allowed into his room, Emily rushed forward, her small hands finding the familiar warmth of his fur. Shadow whined softly, lifting his head enough to nuzzle her. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she pressed her face into his neck. "I thought I lost you," she whispered. Shadow answered with a gentle lick to her hand, his way of saying he would never leave her, not as long as he had strength left to give. Outside the hospital, the city wasn't quiet. Videos of the incident had spread everywhere, sparking outrage that grew louder with every passing hour. News crews stood outside, protesters gathered with signs demanding accountability, and strangers sent gifts and letters of support to Emily and her dog. What had begun as a moment of violence now burned as a symbol of something larger, a call for justice, not an internal. Investigation was launched immediately. The officers who had raised their batons found themselves stripped of their badges within days. Public apologies filled the airwaves, but for Emily and her mother, no words could erase the memory of that terrible moment. Still, the support pouring in from across the nation brought a strength they had not expected. Emily was no longer just a little blind girl with a service dog. She was the face of a movement demanding better. Weeks later, Shadow walked again. His steps were slower, his body still healing, but his spirit was unbroken. On the day Emily was released from the hospital, the two of them walked together out the doors, hand on harness, side by side as always. The crowd waiting outside erupted into applause, cheering for the shepherd who had given everything to protect the girl he loved. Emily smiled faintly, lifting her chin toward the sound. "They're not clapping for me," she whispered, her hand tightening gently on Shadow's harness. "They're clapping for you." Shadow pressed against her leg, steady as ever, leading her forward into the noise and light. His loyalty had nearly cost him his life, but it had also uncovered a truth too powerful to ignore. The city would never forget the day a blind girl's dog was attacked in error. But more importantly, they would never forget how he rose again, stronger, proving that courage and love can stand against even the gravest mistakes.